a bit hard to remember that far back, but I was in Liverpool at the time, working for the post office, and when we heard about it, I wanted to join up straight away. A lot of my friends were in the reserve, the Army Reserve, and they were called up straight away. And of course, the rest of us wanted to join as well. So I went along with a friend of mine to the RAF place and joined up as soon as I could. My mother didn't like it at all, but anyway, she couldn't do much about it. But the actual day, I don't really recall it. But I knew it was something I'd have to be involved in. I knew that. So I didn't want to be in the Army, I didn't want to be in the Navy, so I went for the Air Force. I'd always been interested in flying. I'd been to flying schools and learnt a bit about flying. Always keen on it, and that was my first thought. And I nearly didn't make it. They turned me away at first, but eventually I got in as air crew. Air gunner, of course. They take air gunners, you see. So I went in as an air gunner. Early days, yes. First place we went to for training was Blackpool, and we did all our training there for wireless operators. We learnt Morse, and we did all the drills that had to be done, mostly on the front at Blackpool. And the crowds used to come and watch us drilling at Blackpool. We used to smarten ourselves up as much as we could and show off, you know. But it was good training just the same, yes. The Morse was tough, very tough. 4 hours of Morse every day. But we had to reach a certain standard. And when we did, we passed out and we got another stripe then. We were made Lance Corporals. Oh, the next one was a wireless school down in Swindon, Yatesbury, in Wiltshire. And that was much more intensive, all about wireless sets and how to work them, how to repair them, how to send your messages out from the planes. And it was a very intense course. And when we passed out from that, we were made sergeants, which we were very pleased with because it meant more pay. But that finished the wireless course. And after that, I remember I wanted to be a pilot. Everybody wanted to be a pilot. But they didn't want pilots. They had too many applications. So they said, you can be a navigator if you like. So I said, all right, I'll settle for that. So the next thing, then I was sent away to wait for a navigational course, which I did in near Cheltenham, between Cheltenham and Gloucester, a school there where we learnt navigation and started flying. We did our first flying there in Ansons, old planes that trundled about the sky like Airbuses, you might say. They were very safe. And we learnt our navigation on the ground and in the air, sending off wireless messages as well, because we were wireless and navigational together, wireless operators and navigators. After I passed out there, we were sent down to Kent. They didn't really have anywhere to place us, and they kept us there for several months, doing wireless training mainly. And then I went to an ATS in Turkey, and we did a lot of drill there, smartened ourselves up. We were all sergeants then, under training, and we stayed there for quite a long while. The summer of, I suppose it would be 1940, the summer and autumn of 1940. No, it'd be 41. Yes, late on. And from there, I was sent to a squadron. Now, I was still with a friend of mine that I joined up with, that I was at school with, and the two of us went through all the training together, joined the squadron together, and we went to South Wales, what was it called? Can't remember the name of it. It was near Tenby anyway, and it was 236 Squadron, Blenheims. some of the oldest planes that the Air Force had at the time. But anyway, we were sent to Blenheims and we flew as navigators and wireless operators. And this friend of mine was with me, and we did all our flying together. And then they transferred us over to Beaufighters, the new Beaufighters, which was really something. We were really pleased with them. They were really good. And then we were just a crew of two. There was no third man. There was a third man in the Blenheim, but not in the Beaufighter. You were a navigator, wireless operator. And we were 236 Squadron, Beaufighters. We did very little ops. We did a bit of flying off the coast of Ireland, looking for German fighters, German planes of any description, which we would attack if we saw them, but I never attacked any. And we didn't see much in the way of shipping either. Anyway, I was transferred then to Wattisham with the same squadron. And before I went to Wattisham, this friend of mine that I was joined up with was sent off on a raid up to Beaufighters in Norway and was shot down. That was a very sad blow because I was sharing a room with him and he just disappeared like that. It was Christmas, I remember that. And I knew his parents very well. I had to go and see them and tell them all about it, what I knew. That was a very sad time for me. Anyway, I went off to Wattisham and did some flying in the North Sea on the Beaufighters. Very few flights, about 3 or 4. And then all of a sudden I got a posting to Benson in Oxfordshire on mosquitoes. Well, I was the envy of the whole squadron to go on these wonderful new planes that we'd heard about. I don't think we'd ever seen any, but anyway, off I went to Benson and joined POW, which was Photographic Reconnaissance Unit. It didn't even have a squadron number then. And I started my training then as a photographer, navigator, wireless operator. And eventually joined up with a New Zealander, Freddy McKay. A great lad was Freddy. Tell you something about Freddy. He's mentioned in the book The Wooden Horse because he was the one that covered up the hole when they went out on their escape in the tunnel. He was the lightest man in the camp and they carried him out and he had to cover the hole up so they could escape. And that was Freddy. Anyway, he's dead now, I'm afraid. But he went back to New Zealand. But we flew together on about 20 missions, I think. Quite long ones, too. One of them in particular was over the North African coast when we photographed a lot of their landing places for the invasion, the American invasion of North Africa. And then in December the 8th, never forget that date, we went on a long trip to Austria. And when we got there round about Salzburg, one of the engines didn't go on fire, but it started missing, and they had to shut the engine down. The coolant was missing. And we had to fly back then. We had to make for home straight away on one engine. And we got as far as Belgium, and the other engine ran out of fuel. So we had to do something. I sent a message off home, telling them we were bailing out. And my pilot said, you bail out first and see if you can get away. Typical of Mac. And he flew the plane on. I bailed out. And we weren't very high. It took me about a few minutes to get down. No trouble at all. And landed safely. Plane went on. And Mac bailed out himself later on, as I heard, later in the war. And I landed quite safely. It's one of those things, if you have to do it, you just get on with it. It's one of those, if you're in a blazing plane, well, naturally you just get out as fast as you can. But we had time to think about it. And Mac was still flying her nice and steady and let me get out. And I really wasn't I was nervous, but not. I wouldn't say I was frightened. I never bailed out before of anywhere or done any practice, but I didn't feel nervous. And once I bailed out, the plane disappeared. Everything went deadly quiet. It was floating down, and I could hear dogs barking, and it was an extraordinary feeling. But anyway, I got down quite safely, no trouble at all, hid the parachute, and I saw a light in a farm nearby. A lot of dogs started barking, but I went towards this light, and it was the people in the farm milking the cows. So I don't know, this is rather a long story. I don't know if you want me to carry on. Anyway, the woman offered me some milk. I told her what had happened. They'd heard the plane go over. I said, the parachute's in the field, and the farmer said, we'll leave it there till the morning, he said. You never know who might have seen it come down and would be looking for it, you see. So I said, right. I told him where it was, where there were some cows in the field. And she was very keen to get hold of the parachute silk, you know, the nylon. But anyway, he said, we'll leave it there till the morning. They offered me some milk and some food. And I said, I'd like to get to Brussels, because I knew Brussels from before the war. My mother was born in Brussels, which is a bit odd, I suppose, but she could speak wonderful French, and I could speak a little bit of French through listening to her. And I'd been on holiday in Brussels too, and I knew my way around the city. So I said to these people, I'd like to get to Brussels. They said, well, you have to go to the nearest railway station, which was a place called Enghien, in south of Brussels. And I set off walking for it. And I went down the road. It was about 5 o'clock when I bailed out, so it was getting dusk. This was a December evening. It was quite dusk, and it got dark very quickly. I walked along the country roads. If I saw any traffic coming, I just hid in the hedge. And I remember I saw a light in another farm, and I went and knocked at the door and told them who I was. And they said, oh, come in, and gave me some food and some sandwiches and something to drink. And I did a very silly thing then. I left my identity cards, dog tags as we call them. I left them with these farm people and went off then, told them what I wanted to do to get to the railway station. They said, oh, go down the road there, and off I went again. And I came to this town eventually, and it was occupied by the Germans. I could see a light in the centre of the town, so I kept away from it. And I found a little outside toilet outside some cottages. So I thought, well, this is as good a place as any. So I went in there and stayed the night there. It was pretty cold, but at least I was sheltered. And next morning, very early, I woke up and went and knocked at the door and told them who I was. And they were very frightened. It was a young boy, and he was very frightened. And I said, no, I'll go away. I didn't want to scare them. I cleared off and went more into the town. And I found a church, and I went into the church and I sat at the back of the church, a Catholic church. They were taking early Mass. And I waited till the Mass was over, and then I went to the priest and asked him, could he help me? Told him who I was. He said, no, he couldn't do anything. He had to stay in the church, and told me to go to see the priest and told me where the house was. So I went and knocked at the door of the priest's house, and he came to the door, and he was very frightened. I knew that. He didn't know what to do. So I said, no, all right, Father, I'll go away and won't bother you. So I went in. I found a cafe, which of course in France and Belgium is a pub, and of course I ordered coffee, thinking it was a coffee house. I'd forgotten. Anyway, she said, we don't sell coffee. So I said, oh, I'll have a beer. Speaking French, of course, a little bit. And I ordered a beer, and I sat drinking my beer, and I thought, what do I do now? And there were more and more people coming. It was getting later in the morning, and more people were coming into the town. So I thought, I better get out of here, because somebody might spot me. So I moved out. I found a railway crossing and a railway up on an embankment. And I was getting a bit hungry now, so I pulled out the sandwiches that some people had given me, the farm people, and I sat on the embankment eating these sandwiches. And a train pulled up above me and stopped. because there was a level crossing nearby, and it stopped till the level crossing was opened, and it was full of German troops, which scared me a bit, but I sat still eating my sandwiches and nobody took any notice. So I didn't take any notice either, and then the train pulled away and that was all right. Anyway, I moved up to the railway crossing, and there was a little cottage there belonging to the railway crossing keeper. He looked after the gates, and I went and I saw a girl hanging out some washing on the line. I went and spoke to her. She got very frightened and ran inside and brought her brother out. He said, "Oh, come in." When I told him who I was and I was looking for help, he said, come in, come in. They took me in, gave me food, gave me some civilian clothing, a little jacket, took my RAF battle dress away from me. And I told them I wanted to get to Brussels. They said, oh, well, the railway station's just outside the town, showed me where it was. And I stayed a short while with them, and then I left them, thanked them, and went off and got the train to Brussels. Fell asleep on the train. I was in sort of battle dress trousers with a roll collar sweater and an ordinary sort of old jacket on and a beret. They'd given me a beret which I put on, and I suppose I passed as a labourer type, and nobody bothered me on the train, and I got to Brussels and walked out of the station and no problems at all. So I spent the day in Brussels walking about, didn't know what to do, where to go. Had a look around at where some of the places I knew, but there was nobody left, of course, that remembered me. I went into a chemist's shop and asked him if he could help me, and he said no, he couldn't. He didn't know what to do. So I went back into the centre of the town, and then I decided I'd better hide myself somewhere. So I went in a theatre. I had some Belgian money. We always had foreign money with us in our escape kit. And I paid for a ticket and went in the theatre and fell asleep in the theatre. Had a good warm sleep in the theatre. I woke up when the play was over. I don't know what it was about. It was all in French. And off I went again, and went in another pub in the centre of the town. Told the girl, after I'd ordered a beer, told the girl who I was, and she said, I'll get my boss. And he came and he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'd like to go to this particular part of Brussels that I know. He said, well, if you want to go there, you get the tram number so-and-so outside, and that'll take you there. Have you got money? I said, yes. Right, off you go. So I did that. I made a bad mistake here. I forgot that traffic in Belgium was on the other side of the road as we were. So I got on the tram going the wrong way. I realised this after a while. I got off the tram in a place, a big place, where there was another cafe, and I went in there. I ordered a beer. She said, you're not Belgian. I said, no, I'm Dutch. She spoke to me in Dutch then. So so I said, no, I'm not Dutch. I said, I'm British. I'm trying to find somewhere to hide, you see. So she said, oh dear. She said, sit down over there. She said, I'll bring you some soup. And she brought me some soup, and she said, wait there, my son-in-law will be in shortly. So he came in, and he said, oh yes, we look after you. He took me across to he lived across the other side of the square, the place, and I stayed the night there. Then he took me to his parents' home, not very far away, and I stayed there for Christmas and New Year, about 3 or 4 weeks, stayed with them. Went out shopping with them and went to a football match, went to the cinema, had a lovely party and a lovely Christmas dinner. It lasted from 10 o'clock at night till 4 o'clock in the morning, I remember that. Oh, I had a great time there. And then eventually they got in touch with somebody from the Comet line, which I think most people will have heard about. And the Comet line was started by Dédé de Jong and her father, but she was the instigator of it, and she was a young Belgian girl who wanted to help prisoners get away from. She hated the Germans, wanted to help everybody get out of France and Germany and Belgium. And she started the Comet line. And I think the story is pretty well known now, how she ran the line from Brussels through Paris down to the Pyrenees, Bayonne area. And she hired guides to take people over the border at night, Spanish guides, and took them to the embassy in San Sebastian. And when she first arrived there, they wouldn't believe her that she'd done this. And she said, all right, I'll bring you some more people over. And the next time she brought an airman over, and they had to believe her then. So she arranged with them that they would pay her for everyone that she brought over. They would pay her so many thousand francs. But she said, I'm in charge of the line. You're not running it. I'm running it. So that was arranged, and she carried on from there on. She got people involved in Brussels, in Paris, in Bayonne, Saint-Jean-de-Luz, and there was a farmhouse where I eventually landed up on the Spanish frontier. And before I went down to the farmhouse, I met two other RAF types in Paris. And we all went down on the train with Day, her father, and a young chap called Franco. They all had nom de plumes, for safety. And they took us down to Bayonne, where we stayed the night with different people in different houses. And then we went on to this farmhouse. And the weather was very bad. It rained a lot, and the river that we were to cross was flooded. So the guide told us, I can't take you over tonight. One of the chaps had a broken leg or a broken ankle, and he wasn't very good at walking. And it was a long walk, so he said, I'll come back for you tomorrow night when the weather's better, and hopefully the river will have gone down a bit. So he went off, and we stayed the night there. Unfortunately, some local farmhands knew we were there and sold us off to the Germans, told them we were there. And the Germans came the next day and arrested us all. 3 of us and Day. She was there. The guide, of course, had left. He'd gone back into Spain. So the 4 of us were arrested. The first we knew about it, we were having a sort of meal upstairs in the bedroom. We were keeping out of sight, having bread and cheese or something. And we heard these footsteps coming up the stairs. I remember distinctly saying, here come the Gestapo, big joke, And the door opened and a machine gun poked through, and that was it. Hands up, and we were marched out. And we stood up against the wall of the farmhouse and told we would be shot unless we told them who we were. So one of the chaps had his dog tags, and he pulled it out and he said, we're RAF, because we were all in civic clothes, you see, with forged papers as well. The Comet line arranged all that for us. And anyway, they believed him, and they said, all right, we'll take you down to headquarters and you'll be questioned there. So they marched us all off down to Day as well, and the 3 of us. And we were marched to headquarters, where we were very roughly treated, and then shoved into jail in Bayonne, all separate. We weren't allowed to get together at all, so we all told our different stories, you see. They questioned us separately. And we were kept in Bayonne for about 3 or 4 weeks, being questioned on a regular basis. A horrible experience. And we were very poorly fed. The only food we got was a cup of coffee in the morning, a bowl of soup at midday, sometimes with bread, sometimes without, and another cup of coffee in the evening. And that was it. That was all the food we got. Nothing else. And all we could think about was food all the time. I remember that. And we were questioned at regular intervals, beaten up once or twice. I got a black eye, I remember that. And then, for some reason or other, something to do with the Comet line, they took us up to Bordeaux by train, the 4 of us. They all kept separate again. But I wasn't put in solitary, I was put in a cell with about 8 different people. And they were all French, and I've an idea one of them was a stool pigeon, you know, was there to, started asking me questions, so I said nothing. Didn't tell him anything, didn't tell him I was RAF or anything. And we were there about 7 or 8 days, I think. And then they took us back to Bayonne, and we were questioned again there, and then we were sent up to Paris. We were sent to the prison of Fresnes in Paris, solitary confinement again. I never saw the others after that. They or the other two. And I was kept in solitary there for, I think about 3 months altogether. I was in solitary about 3 months altogether. Questioned again, taken to the Gestapo headquarters in the Avenue Foch. I wasn't beaten up there, but I was threatened with torture. And then eventually they took me to a place where they did threaten to torture me and asked me questions about where I'd stayed. Unfortunately, I had the address of where I'd stayed. I'd kept it on me, and they knew that. So they were able to trace the people I stayed with. And they were arrested. And then eventually I was released over to the Luftwaffe, and they took me over and sent me to prison camp. And I was in 3 different prison camps in North Germany on the Baltic until February 1945, when we were marched out of the prison camp, and we marched for 3 months in the open air, marching about something like 450 to 500 miles, marching, stopping in farmhouses, in sheds, pigsties, all over the place, starving most of the time. That was tough. February, March, April. 2nd of May, we went to a prison camp called Fallingbostel for a while. That was a terrible place. It was absolutely crowded. There were thousands of prisoners there, not enough food for anybody. And then eventually they marched us out of there again because the British were advancing on Fallingbostel. They marched us back the other way, eastward. And eventually, between the Russians coming one way and the British and Americans coming the other way, they just abandoned us, left us where we were in the countryside. On the 2nd of May, we never saw our guards again. We were left on our own, and the next day the British arrived, said, "Stay tight, don't move today, and we'll pick you up tomorrow." So we stayed overnight, raided all the farms, killed chickens, ate everything we could see, get hold of, and even got hold of an abandoned car belonging to German officers. And I remember I got a German Mauser pistol I found in the car, and we found 2 bottles of vodka, which we sampled, and we couldn't drink them. It was far too much for us. We gave them away to somebody, I don't know who it was. And I kept this pistol for a long time. And on the way home, somebody said, "They'll take that off you, when you get in England." So I swapped it with a Canadian chap for his watch. And he took the pistol. I don't know what he did with it, but I got a very good watch out of it. I know that. Anyway, we were released on the 2nd of May, and I landed in England on the 11th of May, my 26th birthday. Never had a better birthday in my life, I'll tell you. I remember that. I was home the next day too. Oh, absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. They couldn't do enough for us. Yeah, everywhere we went, even on the trains, they were cheering us and giving us cups of tea and sandwiches and cakes and everything. Wonderful time. And of course, I got home to Halifax on the 12th of May. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm still wearing the little Maltese cross that I left with that particular person when I left that house, that little cottage. And he gave it to me 62 years later when I met him again. And I've still got it here on my jacket. And I picked that up on my travels when I went to Malta one time, and I used to wear it in my battle dress jacket. And he had that, and he kept it all those years. And they even showed me a vase where they'd written my RAF number on the bottom of it. It was still there when I went back 60-odd years later. We had a wonderful time then. Drank champagne and had a party and had a real knees up. We depended on Red Cross parcels for food. The German food was very basic. Brown bread, what we call pig swill potatoes, they were awful things, barley and stuff like that, cabbage, kohlrabi, turnips, very basic stuff, and a little bit of horse meat now and again, which we quite enjoyed because it was meat. It was very sweet, but we used to make food with it. And then we had our Red Cross parcels. First of all, the first camp I went to, it wasn't too bad. It was a rather small camp, and it was a mixture of officers and sergeants. And then they separated us and sent the officers to another camp, the famous Stalag 3 at Sargon. And we stayed in Bath, as it was called. And then they moved us right up, a terrible train journey up to Memel, up in the north coast of the south coast of the Baltic Sea, right up near the Russian border. And we stayed there the whole of one winter, and it was very, very cold, very hungry, very harsh conditions indeed. The guards kept away from us, except for the ones we called the goons. We always called them that. Used to come round and chat to us. They could speak English. They tried to pick up information about tunnels, escapes, anything and everything they could find, especially tunnels escaping. That was what they were looking for. There were some escapes from there, one or two. I don't think anybody got away. Most people got caught. I can't remember a tunnel being dug there. I wasn't interested in escaping. I had had quite enough. With all my months in solitary confinement, I didn't want to face that again. I do remember in the first camp I went to see the commandant, the British commander. He was a wing commander. I forget his name now. He was pretty well known as an escaper. And I said to him, what would happen here if they came looking for me again, if the Gestapo wanted to question me? He said, while I'm here, he said, you'll never leave this camp. He assured me of that, and I took his word for it. And I never did. I never left the camps again. So that was a big worry off my mind, because I thought they might take me out to question me again, you know. But they didn't. Anyway, we went up to near Memel, and then they took us from there down to a place called Grossetischow, which was near Stettin, down that way. And we were there for quite a long time. What we did in camp, we amused ourselves with games, cards, football, cricket in the summer, would you believe, with a softball. I went into the camp theatre. A chap there wanted somebody to play an Irish part, and I said I volunteered for it. And from then I went on to playing women's parts, would you believe, because I'm small, and I played all sorts of maids and all sorts of odds and sods of girls' parts. Grew my hair long, and chaps used to whistle after me when I was dressed up as a woman. I used to say, get out of it, you know. It was quite funny, was that? Anyway, that's how I amused myself, playing football, reading a lot, of course, and playing games. We used to play chess, and I learned to play chess. And for a while I was amusement officer, they called us officer. I had to organise the games, chess tournaments. We had a record player, a gramophone that you wound up by hand, and we had records which came into the camp from the YMCA, I think they sent them. And we had all the music from Oklahoma and records of all the popular bands. and I used to play them at night in the corridor with all the doors open, and I'd start off with the loud ones and then get onto the softer ones and play the nice soft music at the end. I remember one night I was in the corridor with a little candle light, of course. There hadn't any lights, they were all out. And all of a sudden the doors opened at the end of the corridor, and a guard came in with an Alsatian dog, which came bounding towards me. He's shouting and roaring. He pulled the dog back. And he wanted to know what I was doing when it should have been lights out. I showed him the gramophone and explained it. He said, get rid of it, and told me not to do it again. So I always remember that incident. I got the fright of my life when I saw that dog coming towards me. Anyway, that was the sort of things we did. We played a lot of music. We had concerts, classical concerts, jazz concerts. We did reviews, we did plays, we did play readings. We did all sorts of things. Actually, at one time, the Canadians got some skates, ice skates, and built an ice rink. It froze one night and it melted the next day, and they never got to play the game of ice hockey at all. So that was unfortunate. But I do remember the ice skates we got. I even tried them on and tried to skate. But we did all sorts of things. And of course, there were a few escapes as well. But they were all brought back. I don't remember anybody getting out of the camp and getting home. The well-known escapes are all well documented, the wooden horse and the great escape and all those. Yeah. But I wasn't involved in any of those. I used to help the escape lines people by watching out for Germans, the goons as we called them, and warning them if they came anywhere near, so that they could cover up any digging they were doing. But apart from that, I didn't take part in any of the escapes at all. I didn't want to. How did we get on? We got on very well. There were occasional spats where people disliked each other, so they just broke it up and sent them into different rooms. But what we did, we combined together. As regards food, if we got a Red Cross parcel, we used to get together and share the food out between us. Maybe have a combine of 4 people, and then there'd be enough from the parcels to have a good dinner with we used to have Yorkshire puddings and all sorts of things. And we had some quite good meals from the Red Cross parcels. We had chicken and bacon and stuff like that in tins, all in tins. And we always had jam, chocolate and cigarettes. I must tell you this story about the chocolate and the cigarettes. A friend of mine, a Liverpool chap, he smoked and I didn't. So I used to say, right, you have my cigarettes, I'll have your chocolate. Right, that was fine. And he'd sit there looking at me eating the chocolate. He says, you're not going to eat all that chocolate, are you? And I had to give him some. I said, what about the cigarettes? Oh, never mind that. So he got the cigarettes and the chocolate. That was Bill. Anyway, I think, what else happened in the camps? We had appels twice a day, morning and evening, and we used to mess them up. If anyone was tried to escape, we used to mess them up, and try and get the Germans riled so that they made us stay out there and count us again and again, and in the end they'd find out there was one missing. But we delayed it as much as possible. We used to do a lot of that. And they used to have what they called a sheep count, where they had all the prisoners up at one end, and they used to have to pass through a narrow line of guards, one by one, and they had your identity card, and they used to show you that. You used to stand in front of them, and that's how they counted you. But we used to mess them about as well. Somebody'd go through and then go round and come through again, you see, and it used to take them all day to do it, and then they weren't sure at the end whether it was right or not. Well, we used to play a lot of tricks on the guards, as much as we could, make as much a nuisance as we could without really getting them annoyed. The day that we heard about D-Day, we had a camp radio, of course, and we got all the British news every day. Chap used to come in the hut. And he'd stand by the door and he'd say, "Watch the doors and windows." And then we knew that was the news was coming. And he would recite the news as he'd learnt it from the radio. And he'd go around different huts and different ones every night, so they couldn't be identified, you know. But we had that news. And when we heard of D-Day, there was tremendous wave of excitement, and the word had to come round, keep it down, keep it quiet, don't let the Germans know you know until they tell you. And of course, when they told us, then we celebrated then.
When you heard about D-Day, you knew the end was
Well, we
sight.
hoped, yes.
Yeah.
We used to have bets on it. We used to bet. We used to have cigarettes as currency. We had no notes or coins or anything. Cigarettes were, you bought and sold things with cigarettes. I remember buying a beautiful American leather jacket, flying jacket, for 500 cigarettes because I didn't smoke, so I was rich. Yeah, we used to gamble a lot too. We played poker for cigarettes. Some of the cigarettes were unsmokable. They were so dirty. They'd been handled so much. On the whole, the Germans treated us pretty fairly, I'd say. After the Great Escape, things changed a lot. We were told escaping, there was a notice put up in the camp, escaping is no longer a sport, which it had been treated as. In fact, one commandant, when anyone escaped and was brought back to the camp, used to stand them a big meal and then throw them into jail after that. But he always stood them a meal because they tried to escape. But anyway, this notice came out, and after that things got a bit tough, very tough. And escaping was officially stopped. We were told it was too dangerous. You could be shot if you got out of camp. So the escape committee disbanded then. But it was near the end of the war. So we sat tight then and slugged it out. Oh, yes. I really couldn't say enough about what they faced, the risks they took. I know people now, they'll be over up in York this month from the escape lines, and they suffered. They went through a lot of the German camps and had a terrible time, all because they were caught trying to help us to escape. There's several. Day died just at the end of last year. I wasn't able to get to her funeral, but she had a very big funeral in Brussels because she was a George Cross Medal holder, as well as being made a countess by the German royalty. And she was a wonderful person. She was the same age as myself. She was 90 when she died. And she was an absolutely fearless person. I couldn't say enough about her. She was wonderful. They all were. In fact, I've met several of them who are still alive. I've been down to Bayonne and met them and been over the border into Spain. On a coach, of course, not the way we would have gone, by foot. Crossing a river at night. It was a tough trip, but it would have been worth it. But that was one of the worst days of my life, when the Germans marched in on us. I was nearly home, so near. Could see the Pyrenees. Oh well, I'm still here. At the time I flew, it was very early on, because the first Mosquitoes were used by PRU, Photographic Reconnaissance, and they were the fastest thing in the Air Force at the time. I used to go around bragging about the speed they could do and all that. I can remember one time on a trial test flight, my CO took me up, and he took me very high. It was an oxygen test. And as we got over our aerodrome, he dived it straight down towards the drome. And we touched over 500 miles an hour on the dive, I know that. He was testing me out to see how my nerve was, you know. He pulled out of it. He said, "Okay." I said, "Yeah, sure." Didn't bother me at all. But the Mosquito was fantastic. Absolutely wonderful. I actually flew one time. My pilot said to me, this is Freddy, the New Zealander, he said, "Now, we've been attacked," he said, "by fighters, and I get shot," he said, "and killed." We said, "What do you do?" He said, "Come and sit on my knee." And he said, "You fly the plane." Showed me how to do it and everything. I said, "How do I land it?" He said, "Oh, well, that's another story." But I could fly it. It was very easy to fly. It's a wonderful plane. fast, manoeuvrable, light, absolutely fantastic for any kind of job. It didn't matter, fighter, bomber, photo reconnaissance, meteorological flights. They used to fly out over the Atlantic and bring back the weather news. They could do anything. We had to photograph, we started off mainly photographing German airfields in France. I didn't go over Germany much, largely France, Italy, and places down the south of France. And then oil installations, that was another thing we photographed, south of France. A lot of the photographic flights were over Germany, taking pictures of the German Navy. It was something I never did. But oil installations, yes. We even went to Poland once and found an oil plant there that they didn't know anything about, and right on the borders of Poland. And then another time we flew out to Malta. We photographed an Italian battleship, and then we landed on Malta, stayed overnight, flew off the next day and photographed the whole coast of North Africa, all the way along to Gibraltar, landed in Gib, and flew home from there. That was a wonderful trip. Got good mention for that, and that's some good photographs too. We used to get a few sample photographs from every flight we did, and that was always interesting.
What did your parents think had happened to you?
Absolutely nothing. They thought that they got news from the RAF that I could be a prisoner of war, but they heard nothing. I was in custody of the Germans for about 4 months before I was released to prison camp, so they got no news for at least 5 or 6 months. And my mother was very worried. She didn't know whether I was alive or not. The RAF said they thought I might be a prisoner of war, but they didn't know what had happened to me. So it was quite a bad time for the family. Once I was taken over by the Luftwaffe and sent to Dulag Luft, that was the clearing camp. They knew then that I was alive, that I was a prisoner. Yeah, I forget when that was. Pretty late on. We were allowed 2 letters a month and a postcard, I think, something like that. And very few of them got through, I'm afraid. And they used to send me cigarettes through the Red Cross, and I think I got 3 parcels out of about 20. They all disappeared en route. I don't know what happened to them. Somebody lifted them. But when I did get a parcel of cigarettes, I was in the money. I could buy anything. We used to have a system of barter, where you could buy food for cigarettes, and food prices went up and down as the supplies came in. A tin of salmon was worth an awful lot of cigarettes. And jam, you'd get tins of jam and things like that. I think the Americans were the best. We used to get little tins of chicken in them. They were lovely. And the Canadians used to give us biscuits, huge biscuits, and we used to soak them in water, and they swelled up to twice the size, and then we used to fry them over a hot stove and make pancakes of them. They were really good. And then we had Italian cheese, which came in a huge big lump, and we used to saw it with a saw into pieces. And we used to fry that over the stove as well. We used to make up balls. We even made cakes, would you believe? They used to grind biscuits up into a sort of powder, flour, and then mix it with powdered milk and margarine, which we used to get, and make a dough of it, and then bake it in an upturned bucket. Use it as a sort of oven. And then they used to decorate it with this tin milk, which we thickened up and made a sort of icing of, and used to colour it and make a beautiful cake for somebody's birthday. One chap had his 21st birthday in camp. They gave him a medal and they made him a cake. Poor lad. Solitary confinement.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You've nothing to do all day except think about what they're going to ask you next. Are they going to torture you? Are they going to beat you up? You think of food all the time. You spend a lot of your time hanging around the door waiting to hear the food trolley come along. And I think I'd have gone mad if I hadn't, in fact, at one time, I even contemplated suicide. I was going to hang myself if I could find something to do it with, but I couldn't. But I did find a little piece of metal which had it must have had lead in it, because I could write on the wall, the blank walls, and I could write on it. And I used to write all sorts of menus on the wall: breakfast, dinner, tea, supper, one after the other, all the meals I wanted to eat. And then I'd start writing down the names of all the chaps in the squad I was with in Blackpool, 50 of us, try and remember all the 50 names and write them down. And you had to do things like that to keep your mind occupied, And I used to draw plans of houses and plans of draw motor cars and all sorts of things just to keep your mind occupied. Of course, I used to exercise, walk up and down thousands of times a day, And another job that kept me busy was killing fleas. The whole cell and the bed was covered in fleas. I used to kill 50 or 60 a day, and there were more and more every day. You never got to the end of them. That was a horrible job. And of course the food was very bad. Oh, I must tell this story about one day the German sergeant in charge of our cells in the prison, he had been wounded in the war in Russia, and he got this job because he couldn't fight anymore. He had a bad leg. So he was in charge of the cells, and he came in one day, he said, "You need a haircut." He says, "You look like Jesus Christ," which I did. I had a beard and long hair, and so he spoke a bit of French and I spoke a bit of French, and he brought the barber in. The barber cut my hair and we started talking, and he found out that I was RAF. I told him that, and he'd been wounded on the Russian front, and we sort of hit it off together somehow. And the next day I got extra food, and I got 2 English books sent up that he had picked out to send me, and that helped me a hell of a lot. I can remember one of the books. It was Idle Thoughts of an Idle Fellow by Jerome K. Jerome. And I laughed so much I fell on the bed. I was in hysterics nearly, because I hadn't read anything for about 4 months or more, or even longer. And reading this book just sent me into hysterics. It was wonderful. It lifted my spirits amazingly. He shouldn't have done it, of course. They were trying to destroy my spirit. They were trying to beat me down, That was the whole point of the solitary confinement and the starvation diet, to lower your morale. So that German sergeant helped me quite a lot. I never knew his name. Oh, and then there was another thing in that cell. There was an air vent, a little hole up in the wall. And one day I heard a noise in this hole, so I got on a chair. We had one chair, and I listened, and there was a chap in the cell below, and he was shouting up the air vent. And eventually we used to talk to each other every day at a certain time, before breakfast, I think it was, before they came down with the first meal. And we used to talk to each other. He was a Frenchman who was in jail for being sabotaging at work. He worked in a factory and did some sabotage. And we used to talk to each other. And one day he said, "If you feel up above where the vent is, you'll find a rope there." And there was a rope tucked away up in the vent. And I lowered it down, and he sent me up some food in a sock, some extra food his wife had brought in. And that helped me a hell of a lot. And talking to him was wonderful every day. And then there was a chap who used to shout the news out. We used to open the window and listen to the news. And I told them one day about, in England, we had white bread. And they couldn't get over it, went all around the prison. "Oh, they have white bread in England all through the war," because everywhere else in the continent had brown bread, and it was awful stuff. I always remember that. The things you remember, amazing.